going to look at how to correctly complete a contract for sale of house and land. So the first thing you'll see at the top of the contract is the contract date. However, this is the very last date that ever goes on the contract. It's not entered in until all of the details have been completed in the contract and signed off by all buyers and sellers, and then everything commences from this particular date of contract. Seller's agent, of course, that's the agent that is representing the seller. That'll usually be preset information already put into the contract of sale of house and land. Then seller's details, once again, pretty straightforward. All the names of the people that appear on the certificate of title as the owners of the property are entered into this section, along with their solicitor. And if they are self-acting, means that they are going to be doing the conveyancing themselves, you would simply write in self-acting and their own particulars. Buyer's agent will be entered in only if it's applicable. In many cases, it is the selling agent that deals with buyers, and so in this particular case, we would not have anything written into the buyer's agent, but rather we would go into the buyer's section and put down the names of all of those people that are going to be purchasers in this particular case. So if we have a husband and a wife, both of their names would be inserted into item 5, along with their address, phone numbers, etc., and also the name and contact details of the solicitor that's going to be representing them. Next part is land. So when it talks about land, it is the property address of the house that the sellers are selling and the purchasers are purchasing. So the address will be the actual property address. So for example, if we use an address of 3 Foxdale Court at Waterford West, we would enter in all of the details, and then we would have to put in the lot and plan number. And this is really important because this is the original identifier that was given to the property to ensure we're not selling the property next door. Title reference will be taken from the certificate of title and the approximate area of the property or the land that the property is located on. We would then indicate whether it's freehold or leasehold, and generally it would be freehold, and the local government that the property belongs to. One of the key areas that are generally missed is this area at the bottom, which needs to be initialed by all parties to the contract. The next section we look at is part 7, which is the purchase price. So let's say for the purpose of this example that we've had an offer, initial offer by the buyer of $850,000. But the contract that was signed by the sellers has an asking price of $899,000. So when this offer of $850,000 is presented, the sellers have 3 options. They can accept, they can reject, or they can negotiate. So when you have the process of negotiation, the initial figure will get crossed out and then amended with the new price that they are wanting for the property. So let's say in this case they have countersigned the contract at a price of $875,000. So we would then go back to the buyers and make that change, and they would then once again countersign the contract by crossing off and putting their price, at which point you'll get to the negotiation of where both buyers and sellers are happy with the price. Most importantly, any time that you've got a price that is crossed out, you need to ensure that all parties to the contract, all buyers, all sellers, initial the change. The next area we look at is our deposit, and we have an area called an initial deposit. So initial deposit is when the buyer first signs the contract, we agree to an initial amount, and that might be $5,000. So we would write in $5,000, and in the payable section it stipulates when this has to be paid. In this particular case it says payable on signing of contract by buyer. Contracts are very literal, so that means that if you have payable on signing of contract by buyer, that literally means that when a buyer signs this contract, they are then bound to pay the $5,000 deposit. If they fail to do this, then that is called a breach of contract. Then we can have a total deposit payable of up to 10%. So if we've got a price of $850,000, that's $85,000 that a buyer could put down as a balance deposit or a total deposit. So we would minus whatever the initial deposit that was placed from what is still outstanding to get the balance. So if we did have $85,000, $5,000 is already paid, then we would go and have a balance deposit of $80,000 that would be payable. And in the payable by a date no later than, once again we would specify when this has to be paid. In many cases, this will be once the contract has gone unconditional, which means that all the conditions have been met. So we would write words to the effect on 1 business day after finance approval. And that might be the latest condition that we have specified in the contract. Part 9, deposit holder. It is very important that the deposit is held in the agency's trust account. The money is held in trust on behalf of the clients and customers that own the money, not the agency. So we would have to write in, say, real estate agency trust account to show our understanding that the money is going to be put into the agency's trust account. Finance. Under finance amount, it's generally none of the real estate agent's business how much a buyer needs in order to make the deal happen. So we use wording to the effect of sufficient to complete the sale. You will need to use whatever the wording is in your assignment sheet and specify the information appropriately. The same thing with lender. It's none of our business who the buyer chooses as their lender, so it's generally buyer's choice, and that will be specified in the contract also. Now, a little side note on finance date. Many students like to go in and calculate what the due date will be from starting today, and let's say that the buyer says, I need 7 days to get my finance together. For the purpose of the contract, unless a buyer gives you a particular date, a date that they're going to have things organized by, you would actually write the wording of 7 days from date of contract. Remembering back to the contract date being the very first item that is entered into the contract, and very last item I should say, that gets put in, and that's when all of the dates would start. If you didn't put this, and instead I've got today as being the 10th of June, and I put the 17th of June 2020 as being the due date for finance, 7 days, and I continued to negotiate this contract for a further 2 days, and so the contract date became then the 12th of the 6th, 2020, then I won't have provided the 7 business days or 7 days, but rather only 5 days. So we always enter in the amount of days required. So we say 7 days from date of contract. And then once we've executed the contract, entered in the contract date, that's when the 7 days will begin from. And when these documents are issued to the solicitor, they will send us the due dates for each of these clauses. Similar in the building and pest area. So we've got an inspection date. How long does the buyer require to have a building and pest inspection date done by? So once again, you might have 7 days from date of contract specified in here. And then you will also want to make sure that you select what is applicable in this area. The easiest way to do that is to select the comments tab, and then we can activate our tools where we've got a T with a cross out through it, and I can simply cross out what does not apply. So I can go, oops, I can simply go and cross out in this particular case that yes, we do want a building and pest inspection, so cross out no. Pest inspection, yes, I do want that. And do I want a pool safety inspection? Yes, I do. So I'm going to make sure that I've indicated all of those in the contract by crossing out what's not applicable. Any defects or exclusions would go in this particular area, but that's going to be relevant to the defect. So if it doesn't apply, you don't write anything in this section. Settlement date and place. So you can either put a specific date in, or once again, you can write in the amount of days from the date of contract. So most commonly, 30 days is entered into this area. And that is usually the minimum amount of days for settlement to occur, because there is a lot of things the solicitors have to do in that time in order for settlement to be effected or transfer of ownership to occur. So if we've got a situation where a buyer is trying to work to a particular date, maybe they've got a simultaneous settlement of their property they are selling and purchasing at the same time, it needs to settle on a particular date, we would then opt for a date instead of days from date of contract. And then the place. Because contracts are very literal, whatever the place is that you specify in the contract for settlement, so let's say we're going to use Brisbane for the purpose of this exercise, when the solicitors meet, they will meet in a location in Brisbane to make sure that settlement occurs. Part 13 and 14 are legal requirements. You must have an approved safety switch and smoke alarms existing in the property in order to sell it, so they must be indicated. Section 15 is all about whether or not the property has a pool and whether it has a pool safety certificate. So from November 2015, it became a legal requirement that all pools in Queensland have to have a pool safety certificate to show that they are compliant. So Part 15.1 reads, a regulated pool forms part of the property being sold or is on adjacent land. In other words, is the property that's being sold, has it got a pool, yes or no? If it yes, then automatically you need to complete section 15.2, which asks, is there a current pool safety certificate? And so a current pool safety certificate means a Form 23. So that means that we've got a current Form 23 that we can go and select that and the certificate number, and so we would then be able to opt for A. If we don't have one of those, do we have a current Form 17? So this is for newly constructed or altered pools only, and so we would then tick B. If we don't have either option A or B, we must ensure that the owner of the property provides us with what's called a Notice of No Pool Safety Certificate, a Form 36, and this is one of your assignments. So you can look at this a little bit more in depth to get a better understanding of this document. Excluded improvements, Part 16. So this is basically anything that is fixed at the property that is not going to stay at the property at the sale. So excluded improvements might be things like TV screens that are fixed to a wall and they're not going to be included as part of the sale. We would need to make sure we detail these so that we know, or the buyers know, that these items will not be staying with the property when the settlement is effected. Item 17 is about included chattels. So that's the opposite. They are loose items that may usually be taken out of the property at sale, but they're going to be staying as inclusions as part of the sale process. So things in here might be that the stainless steel fridge in the kitchen is going to be staying with the property. So once again, we would detail these items, and good idea to put model numbers and those sorts of things and be quite descriptive so we can ensure that when settlement is going to be effected, the items that were viewed by the buyers will still be the items that they are going to be taking possession of at the settlement, at the transfer of ownership. Now, we can either sell a property as a vacant possession, meaning that the property will actually be completely vacant at the time the owners are moving in, or if we've got an existing tenancy in place, we may be selling the property with a tenant in occupation. Now, if we are going to be selling an investment property and there are existing tenants in place, the new buyers are going to become the new landlords. So we need to transfer all of the details relevant to that lease onto the contract for sale of house and land so that those tenancy agreements can now be passed on to the new owners. So term is whether it's a fixed term or a periodic tenancy, how much they are paying in rent, how much the bond is that's being held by the Residential Tenancies Authority, who the tenants are, what's the commencement date and the completion date of the tenancy, so this will be relevant to your fixed term, who the managing agent is, their phone number, fax number and email address. Item 19 is what's the property being used for? Is it a residential property? Is it rural, vacant land, rural residential or something other? If there are any work orders or notices or applications that are relevant, we would need to list these so that the buyers are aware of these, so that we don't have an issue down the track where they become aware of something that we did not disclose and we're going to have an issue. Encumbrances. So this is where we need to have a look at our certificate of title. Are there any easements on the property that need to be disclosed? And we would need to enter that information in place. It's not sufficient to write searches will reveal in these particular sections as is written. You need to make sure that you refer it to the certificate of title. And these are things that undisclosed could cause a property contract to fall over, and basically the owners would be at a loss of a buyer and the agent would not be entitled to payment of commissions. 22 is interest on unpaid money. This is if we can't settle by the appropriate time. So it says in this particular section that if it's left blank, then you need to refer to item 22B. So this is only if we can't settle at the correct time, then we may have the buyer having to pay interest or seller having to pay interest on the money until settlement can be effected. Now, special conditions, as the clause suggests, are over and above the general conditions of things like finance and building and pest. And it's vitally important that as an agent, we do not write the special conditions on behalf of our sellers and buyers. Whenever someone needs a special condition, it's important that their legal representative writes up the clauses for them, because we do not want to be held to account for using incorrect wording that doesn't look after the interest of the buyer or seller. We need to be impartial. So once the seller's solicitors or buyer's solicitors prepare for us these special conditions, we would go and write into the effect C Annexure A, and then we would attach that Annexure A detailing whatever the special conditions in this particular case are. Section 24 is all about signing. It's important to refer the buyer to the buyer's acknowledgement so that they understand upon signing of the contract what happens. And so it's important to ensure that enough time is given for the buyer to be able to read through the contract, read through all the conditions so that they understand what they are being bound by. The contract is subject to a 5 business day statutory cooling off period. So in other words, the buyers have the opportunity to terminate the contract within 5 business days of signing if they decide to change their mind for whatever reason, but a 0.25% penalty fee may be applicable if they do that. The only time that you'll see the agent's signature is in this particular section where it says witness. Witnessing the seller's signatures, witnessing the buyer's signatures. But this doesn't have to be the agent. It could be anybody over the age of 18 years old that's going to witness the seller and the buyer signing the contract, particularly if they are going to be signing this document not in front of you, but they're going to be issuing an email to you of this document. You may not be there witnessing their signatures, so someone else can also be signing that as a witness. And then the standard terms and conditions that we've just spoken about are all outlined in the terms and conditions of this standard contract. Hopefully that explains a little bit more about how to complete the contract, the sale of house and land, more effectively, and helps you to complete the relevant assignment.